I often hear people talk about the courage to be yourself and how that's an aspiration that everyone should have, that they should be fully themselves. And yet, for kids with ADHD and autism and other neurodivergences, that's not true. Because when you look at the research around ADHD and autism and their struggles with socializing, you find that one of the biggest deficits they have is that they struggle to adapt their personality to the friend group or the social group that they're interacting with. Because what's normal in society is adapting yourself to the people around you, to almost mimicking them, to reflecting what they are doing. And if you can't do that successfully, you're gonna fail socially. And I went through that myself. Everybody's story is gonna be different, but I'm gonna share mine, what I've learned, and how I think we can help kids deal with the social problems that come with being neurodivergent. This is my story.
When I was real young, I had a best friend named Jamie Powell. Like in third grade, I remember we put together this secret club where there was like a obstacle course that we made on the playground. We had these submarine plans and we were gonna float our submarine down Coldwater Creek. I'd spend the night at his house here and we'd roller skate down this driveway as fast as we can. And Jamie had my back and he was my best friend. And then he moved away in third grade to Georgia. After Jamie moved and I didn't really have any friends, my mom made the suggestion that I go door to door and ask people if they had any children I could play with, which is a terrible idea in hindsight. And she figured that out once the satanic panic kicked in and everybody was afraid their kids were going to get kidnapped by cults. So my mom's next plan to help me make friends was to invite kids from my class to spend the night, because I kept being too scared to do it myself because I knew they'd say no. But she decided she would call and she asked me who I wanted to invite to spend the night. And I said, the great ones. So the first of the great ones was Jeff Martin, who I invited. And to impress him, we hid behind this corner and I told him, let's throw some bouncy balls at the annoying girl named Shannon across the road. And that's what we did. So then my mom invited Tony Vitello, who was like the coolest of the great ones. And so to impress him, we made mud balls in our yard and then threw them at my window up above, yelling, Dookie! And then we invited Luke Ford, who was quiet and shy and seemed very nice. And so he was the one I was able to get the courage up to when we were sitting on the couch in my living room to ask him, can I be one of the great ones? And he said yes. And I got so excited until he said, yeah, but now we're the legends, or something stupid like that. And I was crushed. But there were a couple of guys that I did hang out with, but that wasn't any good either. But then I made a friend named Neil at Sacred Heart before I left in sixth grade, and we got along really well until we started hanging out with this cousin, douchey Joe. The straw that broke the camel's back for me was we were going to do the Olympics here at his house, and we played soccer first in the backyard, and somebody kicked the ball over the fence, and we lost the ball, and everybody was upset. So then we decided to do the hammer throw. Well, of course, we used a real hammer, and we thought we'd come over here to common ground where we would just throw it as far as we could. Except Tim Wall decided to throw his sidearmed instead of overhand, and it whipped over toward that house and hit the bumper of a truck where the guy was outside, and he started yelling at us, which made us sprint across, climb across Coldwater Creek, and back to Neil's house. So then we came back over here to do the javelin throw, and one of the guys threw the javelin, which was a broomstick, right through the front window of his house. And douchey Joe decides to say something like, well, we better wrap things up here before Shannon breaks something. And I hadn't done anything wrong. And I decided these weren't my friends, and I didn't want to be treated like that anymore. And so I left, and I never talked to him again. The easiest places for me to make friends was youth groups. And this was one of the first ones I joined at First Christian Church of Florissant. And in some ways it was like a substitute social group. And my brothers also went. And one time, I got to go to Chuck-a-Burger with them and hang out with all the cool teens in the youth group. Chuck-a-Burger was the place to go after church, and so when my brothers invited me the first time, I was so excited. And we sat inside, and I just remember having the time of my life. But I must have talked too loud or laughed too hard because the next week things changed. My brother Shane told me that now Chuck-a-Burger was just for the older kids. It was only for the high school kids, and I was in 8th grade. Well, then I heard one of the other 8th graders come out and say, hey, Greg, are we going to Chuck-a-Burger? And he did. So it was just me that was left out. I was the one who couldn't go to Chuck-a-Burger anymore. So once my brothers stopped coming here, I did find some people that were kind of like friends, but Everything we went to, every event we went to, you could tell that they were kind of irritated to have me around. In fact, I have a videotape from a conference we went to called Christ in Youth, and you can just see how irritating they found me.
Go grab a Dr. Pepper out of my cooler.
Is that still on?
Thanks. Can I grab a Dr. Pepper out of your cooler?
Hello.
You're on film, and we'll be.
Lord.
What?
Those are people in my suite.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Sarah. Sarah.
You
Hi.
speak.
Oh.
Go away. Go away. You need a life. You have to record people.
I gotta find all my stuff. What? Is it on?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
This is the last.
No, cause
Heather, why don't you repeat what you said just a few minutes ago, huh? Huh?
you want me to?
No?
I will.
I just want you to feel bad about it.
Can you just shut up? You drive me crazy all the way home.
Thank you.
I'm just playing. I'm just kidding.
Sure you are.
Sorry.
Yeah.
When I first heard the theme of this conference, Difference Takes Courage, I kind of bristled. All my life, I've known that I am too much for a lot of people, and that a lot of people don't like me because of that. All I ever wanted was to be accepted and liked for who I was, for who I am. But I wasn't, and in many ways, I'm still not. So the idea of the courage to be yourself doesn't sit right with me, because at the time, if you had offered me a magic potion that would change me into a normal person socially, that I could just do the things that I'm supposed to do to make friends and keep friends, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. There was no courage. I was terrified and scared and lonely, and I didn't have a choice. I want neurodivergent kids to be able to be who they are and not fear that that will make them a pariah, or that they will have to be alone at the lunch table, or that they'll be scared to, invite someone over to spend the night because they're worried they're going to get rejected. So I'd like to discuss some of the science about what does and doesn't work to help neurodivergent kids overcome their social struggles. I'll be drawing from 3 sources today, and the reason why we're often rejected listed in these studies: frequent shifts in conversation, not listening to others, initiating conversations at inappropriate times, frequently interrupting or intruding on others, clowning around, aggression, poor sportsmanship, bragging, emotional dysregulation. Have high rates of behavior that is off-task, disruptive, noisy, and rule violating. And then there's a lack of positive social behaviors, such as paying attention to social cues, perspective taking, conflict resolution skills, empathy, all of which makes us vulnerable to social rejection. Is that it takes kids about 30 minutes at a few social interactions to decide that ADHD kids are disruptive, unpredictable, and often aggressive, leading to criticism, rejection, and withdrawal. Also, the majority of these kids have few reciprocated friendships, and the friendships they do have more conflict and less intimacy. Half or more of all elementary school aged youth with ADHD are peer rejected, compared to 10 to 15%. That's a stark difference. And when there are social impairments like this, it can extend across the entire lifespan of the child. Social impairments are also one of the most common reasons that kids get referred for an ADHD diagnosis. So the authors of this study conclude that social incompetence is a serious, debilitating condition. So if we acknowledge that social incompetence is a serious issue, what do we do about it? How do you make kids suddenly accept other kids who are disruptive and noisy and rule breakers? And there are some things that have promise, and one of those is social skills training. Traditional social skills training has kids coming into the clinic, sometimes in groups. They tend to use what's called didactic instruction, traditional teaching about these behaviors, and then also role playing, so that they can kind of see how these work in practice. But traditionally, parents and teachers are not involved in social skills training. One thing that they looked at in the first study is, what are the mediators of social competence? And so there are a lot of theories. For instance, one of the proposed mediators for improving the social competence of kids with ADHD is just improved social cognitive skills, teaching them the skills that they need. So what they found was that improving an ADHD kid's social skills cognitively doesn't really help. The second candidate mediator is effective parenting, or improved parenting. That was a pretty weak connection as well. The third mediator is surprisingly strong: medication. I didn't take medication growing up, and I can tell you that not taking medication sure doesn't help. But if I could go back and take medication under proper supervision and oversight, I believe that it would have helped me have a little bit more control. They also proposed some moderators for ADHD and social incompetence. One proposed moderator is ADHD subtypes, that there are differences between ADHD inattentive and ADHD combined. A second moderator is comorbidity. So oppositional defiance disorder is a huge contributor to social incompetence. A third moderator is gender, that boys and girls are affected differently by this. And age is also a potential mediator. Why the lack of efficacy in traditional social skills training? As they say in this paper, ADHD social deficits are a performance deficit as opposed to a knowledge deficit. So there's this assumption that once you teach the ADHD kid these skills and they go out in public and they encounter a social situation in which these skills are required, they'll recognize it and implement it. But these multi-step processes aren't really that realistic for kids with ADHD. There's this assumption that if a kid learns social skills and improves their social skills, that their peers will notice and accept them. But that's not the case. So for a kid with ADHD who's put in all this work to learn these social skills, to just continue being rejected is incredibly discouraging. Why would they even keep trying? Now, I promise this isn't all doom and gloom. It looks bad, but there are some promising directions. For instance, promising direction number one is intervening at the point of performance. Instead of doing this in a clinic, what if we took social skills training to the class involving adults present during real-world interactions? That means enlisting the help of parents and teachers to help with social skills training. We need real-time feedback. Even that isn't going to help every time, but it will help us see what we're doing better. There's also another approach in which you recruit peers as coaches, pointing out ways that that kid might improve or that where their behavior might be inappropriate. Having a peer tell you that rather than a parent or teacher is even more powerful. But arguably one of the most important things you have to do is increase the receptiveness of the kid with ADHD. People with ADHD don't like being criticized out of the blue. If they can see their own deficits, if they can understand where they're going wrong, they will want to fix it. And the second promising direction is changing their peers' reputational bias. This one is the biggie in my opinion. And if we're going to try and teach ADHD and autistic and neurodivergent children to improve their social skills, couldn't we also teach neurotypical children to accept that some social skills aren't as rigid as they need to be? And so there's two approaches that have been attempted, and one is leveraging adults' ability to change peer biases. There's actually a model for this called mosaic intervention. When teachers encourage their peers to see the positive things in ADHD kids by pointing them out, maybe something creative that they do. There's another program that's interesting where they have lunch buddy mentoring, where college-age kids hang out with a kid with ADHD. When I was young, and I was having so much trouble from 4th grade to my sophomore year, it would have made a world of difference to have more than just my mom trying to help me have a normal social experience growing up. Having teachers, boost me in the classroom instead of pointing out what a terrible distraction I was. There were so many times where I would know that I was being rejected. I could see it in their behavior toward me, but I could never understand what I had done. I wish I had had something like social skills training. I wish people had been looking into how can we help Shannon. The great thing about these studies is that it gives us a path. It gives us a way to address the problems. It gives us a framework for working with kids with ADHD, and this is great. But that still leaves us with some bad news. If you don't do anything about these social problems, if you let a kid go years without any friends, feeling lonely and socially incompetent, there are lasting effects that I experience. For instance, I'm deeply insecure still. And so when people show an interest in being my friend now, I'm very cynical and very skeptical, and that's sad. Also, rejection sensitivity. People with ADHD are more rejection sensitive in general, but also we get rejected way more. And so as a result, we tend to withdraw from any situation that could potentially lead to rejection. Also, you learn what appropriate socialization is by socializing. And so if you don't socialize, your social ineptitude just keeps going. There's no end to how weird you can get if you don't have those social boundaries or borders that tell you these are where you should stay within so that other people don't think you're too much. So there is good news, a lot of good news. For instance, online support is restorative. You know, finding ADHD Twitter and finding ADHD TikTok and all these people who have had the struggles with rejection sensitivity and just the experience of being rejected so often. And once you find your people, it's like when Gonzo finds the other aliens that are just like him. I mean, it's a homecoming, it's a celebration. I also am a strong believer that we need in-school social groups for neurodivergent children. There are parts of these studies that talk about how ADHD kids can have quality friendships, but usually it's with other ADHD kids. Because a lot of the deficits that they have, if they share those deficits, they're not seen as deficits. Another positive is that peer rejection, as depressing as that is, it's not the same as friendlessness. You might find that one person who's also peer rejected, and you two could connect. I think what the greatest news and the most positive thing we should take away from this is we're here and now. And so we're in a place to help. I'm in a place where I can help my kids understand socializing. And I've made it my goal to make sure that they do always have at least one friend that they can count on. So that means, organizing Dungeons and Dragons campaigns so they can go, getting my kids into scouts so they have natural social groups. Parents have to put in more effort for their kids with ADHD to help them overcome those social deficits. And it really is critical that we all help. I hope the stories I've shared from my own life don't come across as a pity party, because it's not. What I hope it is a learning opportunity, a way for people to see from the perspective of someone who's gone through it, what these experiences of rejection do to you. It's like there's this rule book for socializing that everyone else has gotten except for us. And everyone else seems to know the rules. And so we're trying to learn it on the fly. And at the same time, we have all these executive dysfunctions as ADHDers that make it even harder. We don't learn from our mistakes. We try to, we want to, but when it comes down to it, it's hard for us to do. If people understood this concept a little better, perhaps they would be a little more patient with us, a little more understanding and a little more kind. And that's what we need. We need people who are willing to take the time to understand us, see us as something more than just a disruption, a rule violator, to be treated as someone who is just, a constant nuisance. That weighs on you after a while. And so I hope that as a society, as a culture, we can learn to embrace neurodivergent children for who they are without asking them to change drastically. I mean, yeah, we do need to adapt some of our behaviors, but we need people to understand how hard that is for us, especially when you're unmedicated. When I was unmedicated, people treated me like I was the worst. We need to be the ones who help those kids understand how to be better at socializing with others. And we need to help their friends, those other kids in their classroom, understand what ADHD looks like, why it looks that way, and why they should be a little more patient. If we can do that, the world's going to be a better place for all neurodivergent kids and neurotypical kids. We all do better when there's more empathy. Thank you to those who invited me to give this talk, and thank you for listening. Have a great day.
So my sophomore year of high school, I started doing plays here at Incarnate Word, and I met some of my best friends in high school, Yibby and Emily and Tim. And really what I learned was that I just needed to meet the right people to be friends with. And one thing was I get along better with girls than guys, and I didn't know that until I came here. And so I did have a great high school career of, little adventures that we do and getting into trouble and having to come in drag because I got in too much trouble here. But it was great, and life did get better after those harsh years of having no friends. And this is another place where I had a lot of great friends that I made in college at Mizzou at the Newman Center. It's a Catholic student center, and I met a lot of amazing people who really embraced me for who I was and didn't judge me, didn't treat me differently, and included me in a lot of stuff that they did. And that just made a huge impression on me in my life, and I will never forget this. And so you know, even if you have trouble as a young kid, it does get better.